We're going to need help. It's going to be a political mess and challenge, and it is not over. As I say, there's another event coming this week. Santa Ana event is what I'm talking about. And we'll need buy-in from the federal government, which is now going to be wrought with complexities that we've never seen before. So into this, we bring a guy who is so well acquainted with both Sacramento, California politics, and then the federal government and the way in which we will connect there. He is the political analyst for iHeartRadio and across the CBS television network of stations. How about it for Gary Dietrich? Well, sir, as I say, let's start in California, and then we'll get to the whole Trump thing and how you play that, et cetera. But there's a lot of BS out there, I think, Gary, about the degree to which there was money and strategy when it came to preparation and preparedness for this insanely, record-breaking dry winter, and now we face these Santa Ana winds. I wonder if you could speak to some of the specifics there. I say BS because I think there is into the zeitgeist sort of like, well, they've got all the money, they've diverted it to everything from the Delta smelt to, DEI to there wasn't enough money to keep the reservoirs maintained. A lot of that is just not true. And yet it'll be against that messaging that Newsom and the Democrats who run California are going to have to forge some kind of strategy moving forward.
Well, first of all, Mark, what a difference a week makes, huh? Since we talked last Monday till now, let me just state the obvious, but it's important to state. The human cost in this, the things that Courtney so eloquently was talking about with both people and animals, the environment, those things have to take center stage. My heart goes out to them. People that don't know my background, I spent a lot of time in disaster zones. I started with right after Hurricane Katrina down in the Gulf. This is over a decade and a half ago, but I've been in hurricanes in Florida, fire zones, many of them in California. I know what this feels like. I know what it's like to be boots on the ground. So I just want to say to start, Mark, for you personally, many of our listeners and viewers who probably have direct connections, it's just a horrific situation. Let me tell you that I understand that. I understand that very personally. All right, next, let's go to the California /national /federal conundrum, conflicts, consternation. This is not uncommon. I will tell people, if you go back to the George Bush days and dealing with Hurricane Katrina, you saw then, the examinations that began right away, the recriminations that began right away, if you remember, Mark, related to FEMA and the federal response in New Orleans, the local mayor's response, the governor's response in Louisiana and beyond. This happens all the time. It's sad, but it's sort of the nature of politics. So let's try to filter some of this down if we can real quickly, all right? As often happens, it is not black or white. In other words, is it all Newsom's fault? No. Is it all Karen Bass, the mayor of LA's fault? No. Are there some responsibilities that need to be examined in an accountable way? Of course. That has to happen, right? So I think it's important to remind people that that's the case. It's never all one or all the other. Almost never do you find that in the governmental and political arena. So I think that's important going forward. There's going to be some very important questions that are going to be asked, and they should be, right? What preparedness was done, wasn't done? What budgeting was done properly? What cuts probably should not have been made? You're even hearing this between, as you know, Mark, the LA mayor and the county fire chief. Look, we didn't have adequate resource, budgets should be cut. So let's just start with that's very important, and it's going to play out in the days to come. Now, one last thing, just as an introduction, is this going to always be forever and ever, amen, Washington versus Sacramento? No, it's not. I'd be surprised if Vance and or Trump don't come to the disaster zone at some point. They are completely wrapped up, of course, in an inauguration that's going to happen a week from today, and he's not even officially the president yet. But I do expect, as we saw in the Paradise Fires, when we saw Newsom and Trump walking together through that fire zone, and I was there just the day before that happened. I think that is going to happen. And what the outcomes are going to be, anybody's guess as of now.
So I'm seeing high-profile Californians and people with big holdings in California. I'm talking about the tech bros, et cetera. They're all at Mar-a-Lago, as you say. And they have thrown money at the Trump inauguration. $1 million apiece seems to be kind of the number that they've all settled on from, Zuckerberg and on down. I went down the list a little before you came on. Google, Microsoft, they're all popping off for $1 million. Bezos, the same. So it's extraordinary to me that there is no effort to get money out to Californians, so many communities in need. Now, maybe they'll step up. It's early in the game. As I say, the game is really likely to have a lot more downbeats than it has now. But it's sad, I think, in a way, and I speak as a Californian this way, and I talk to you as someone who's been, immersed in California politics for so long, that we have to depend on these billionaires to step up. But the realities are some of the environmental challenges that we face in California are so daunting that you do need buy-in from many of these big wallets that find themselves in a position to help out.
Well, you do. And look, it goes to the NFL, apparently. I think I read this yesterday, $5 million contribution to the wildfire situation. They're one of them's going to play tonight in Arizona, as you know, because of the fires. So I think you're going to see, and already are seeing, Mark, a lot of corporations and a lot of wealthier, as you point out, individuals get in this game. I think that's inevitable. Part of it is they have their own stakes there. I mean, some of these people have their own residences there, or second residences, or third or fourth. Some of them have employees there. I mean, CBS is part of Paramount, as you know. Paramount's operation in LA, very sensitive to this. People are working from home. I know there's going to be ongoing attempts to raise funds to support the region. It's going to be a long rebuild. That's the other thing I wanted to sort of say right up front, Mark. I know you know this, but I'll tell you what, there's people right now, Paradise Fires 5-6 years ago, people just now rebuilding. So this is part of the challenge. Okay, let me flip the coin. Here's an advantage, if you can call it that, but it truly is one in the modern world, an advantage that is going to be had by the Southern California, LA region, and that's simply being the heart and soul of media, right? I mean, getting the message out. People forget that Western North Carolina was absolutely ravaged by Hurricane Helene, but it is not the center of the media universe like LA is, right? So I would sincerely expect that you're going to see a much quicker response and a much more vibrant response than you see to many disasters, simply because the cameras, the celebrities, the organizations, the companies themselves have roots in that region.
Well, I think you contextualize it so well, which is one of the reasons I love talking to you. I mean, but I'll get to the comparison in a second because I do want to talk about the context. It's interesting that a lot of these areas, like the Pacific Palisades, for example, and Malibu, it's total devastation. I mean, it is as though a bomb has gone off. I mean, people are talking about Hiroshima, et cetera. Now, the beauty here is that there wasn't the loss of life, obviously, that there was in a Hiroshima, et cetera. So that comparison, I think, breaks down pretty quickly. But the complete elimination of a community is something that is an extraordinary thing to see. So we're talking about, as you suggested, I mean, if 6 years in the instance that you just talked about, I mean, it may be generations before we actually see these communities return to what they were. And they're going to have to return in a different way. And this is, I think, it's kind of, you were rubbing up against this, which is we're going to have to find building materials that are fire resistant. I mean, the wood and the construction materials that are used now were just gone in seconds against the kind of natural environment that continues to rule and will rule into the future. So you cannot rebuild in the same way. And now then I get to what you were talking about when you were contextualizing, because these hurricanes that have affected the East Coast particularly and have been so enormously devastating, they tend to be followed by just building back. And I think there aren't, for example, in Florida, they're trying to increase seawalls and this sort of thing. But there aren't necessarily the true pivots in those regions that California is going to have to do. I mean, we need a real reckoning here. This is a situation in which you can't. I'm seeing all of these building restrictions. I'll stop talking in a second, but it's such a treat to share this with you because I see all of these articles written about how building restrictions, which are so really tough along the Coastal Commission and also in the Palisades and throughout California, Altadena included, are going to be waived so that people can rebuild. So, well, in a way that's good because it allows rebuilding, but in a way that's bad because what you need is new come to Jesus sort of construction materials there where we can find resistant materials used in the building of homes and businesses. Aren't I right?
Yeah, Mark, there's going to be, use the word reckoning. That's the painful word to even say right now, because there already are local government officials who said, look, in the last 5-10 years especially, we haven't approved developments that would have been approved 20 or 30 years ago because of the reasons you're talking about. The same thing certainly with building materials. I mean, you talk about the cedar shake roofs. A lot of people don't know what we're talking about, but it's just split cedar. I mean, the shingles, okay, is what is so dangerous in these fire-prone areas. And, of course, wood frame structures. That's why now you see in California, as you know, Mark, almost exclusively stucco homes on the outside, cement or, non-flammable material. They call them shingles, but really they're tile roofs. And that's the kind of build back that the governor has even been talking about a weekend. It's probably going to be required. Now, one of the most painful parts of this, Mark, is going to be this area so very well, but along the PCH, the Pacific Coast Highway, those homes that were literally perched on the other side of the highway, right over on the bluffs above the ocean. Are those going to be allowed to be built back? Boy, it's hard to envision some of that happening, even if you waive a lot of environmental regulations. So there are some tough choices that are going to have to be made. And this is going to be very difficult because what do you do if you deny people that? People, of course, say, well, wait a minute, that had value, right? That property, that home had value. Are you going to compensate all those people if you don't allow them to build back on that specific spot? The same with businesses. So there are going to be some tough choices that have to be made. These are talked about a lot, but now they're going to have to be implemented, Mark, about what you do with everything from where you allow people to build to what you allow them to build with to what then you require of them in terms of brush clearing and, as the fire guys and gals call it, defensible space. These are all things that are going to come into play in the next 12 to 24 months that are going to, in some ways, as you say, maybe over the long term, be building back better, but there's going to be some painful choices and decisions, and ones that I might add are not going to be inexpensive.
You talk about a supercharged political issue. You're telling people who could afford to buy coastline property in Malibu that they may not be allowed to rebuild their residence there. That is a conversation that has going to, it'll have to have some money attached to it, right? Because you'll have to compensate these homeowners in some way. I don't know where that money is going to come from, and that we're going to get to that in a second. And number two, as you say, these people had something of immense value there from the standpoint of a love of that place. But it is also true that the Coastal Commission is notorious. I mean, there's a Carolla video going around. Adam Carolla did a video about, I wanted to read, now I put a swimming pool in my Malibu place, and it's a double-hulled pool. They want I got to build it with two hulls because if it leaks, it gets into the water supply. They're so worried about the water supply. It costs $500,000 to build this pool. And Adam is right about the Coastal Commission. He's right about how tough they are, which is why I think you're right when you say they may actually crack back on people's ability to build there, but to build their residences back. But I would also say that one of the virtues of some of these protections and regulations is, that that swimming pool water or whatever it may be doesn't leach into the drinking supply. I mean, if it leaches in the drinking supply, you'd hear Corolla going, this is the Great Coastal Commission. They couldn't do anything to prevent the water from leaking into the drinking supply. So you see the clash of so many different things, from regulations to a desire to renew, and now to the insurance. There is an emerging issue that really emerged a few years ago. Courtney and I have been talking about it for years because we're on the FAIR plan, which, as you know, is troubled, and many people are on the FAIR plan who are in a lot of these regions that have been burned out. Speak to the realities of the FAIR plan, the monies they have, and the future of real estate and insurance in California.
Yeah, well, as you know, Mark, for those other parts around the country understand some of this. But to understand California's dilemma, you have to understand that there are major insurers who have just stopped writing policies in certain regions of the state, or in some cases in the state in total. There are other insurers who have said, okay, well, listen, if we don't get adjustments that allow us to, actuarially sort of build in the risk structure in different parts of vulnerable parts of California, we can't write them. I mean, and then you have, so let's just start with the private market to begin with, and then we'll jump into the FAIR plan. In terms of private insurers, they did get some changes and some accommodations as recently as just a few months ago that enable them to, say, okay, we'll write policies, but they're going to be more expensive in riskier areas. Now, to some people's ears, that makes sense, right? To other people, they're saying, well, listen, if you're an older couple and you're in those areas, you could be literally priced out of your home by insurance, right? What do you do about that? That's still a question that lingers out there. And then the FAIR plan, the one that is you're on, and if people don't know, the reason why people like Mark may be on the FAIR plan is because they couldn't literally access private market insurance. So they have to be in this, governmental or quasi-governmental entity that offers insurance, but it is at higher prices and at lower value in terms of being able, what it will cover. But that entity, there's a lot of discussion right now, as you pointed out, Mark, about the survival of the FAIR plan. What is it going to take? There are some redundancies built into it. We won't get too wonkish about that today. Sort of reinsurance and other things that will help the plan to survive. But there's a backstop, an ultimate backstop that a lot of people are worried about, that insurers have the capacity, that they're required to pay into the FAIR plan if it needs extra monies. And that will mean that all insurers in California have to pay part of that backstop. So this is something that over the next few months is going to be talked about a lot. And sorting out the California insurance market is going to be, in the aftermath of this particular conflagration, is going to be a big job.
This is also pointed to, it's interesting, it's not just California. Danny says that's what's happening in Florida now. People are leaving because of the home insurance problems. It's not just, I mentioned Florida in relation to the hurricanes, and the insurance companies are going, hey guys, you're building back in the same areas that are being devastated every few years, and we're sick of insuring it, and there's not enough money here for us to continue. That is the money from insurers. I mean, those who want insurance are going to be paying an excruciating bill. I mean, as you suggested, it to the point that you just can't afford it anymore. And so you either have to self-insure, which means that, if my home burns, I'm just going to build it back on my own because I've got the money, or I'm going to have to leave. And the last thing I would say, and tell me if this is right, the FAIR plan exists really to support real estate and the real estate market in California. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, if you want to finance a home, which is the way most of us buy homes, you need to insure that mortgage somehow. And so that insurance must be there. Otherwise, the bank won't loan you the money. And so that's why the FAIR plan's there, to say, hey, don't worry, the state's got them covered, even though we can't get State Farm or Allstate or Farmers, et cetera.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, every mortgage grantor is going to require insurance, right? I mean, that's just the way it works. You have to have proof of insurance to get a mortgage. And so, yes, the FAIR plan both has preserved the real estate market, but also, of course, helps the insurance companies from going bankrupt in their view, and helps the average person retain insurance, because it's not just when you're buying a new home, as you know, Mark. Some people's plans have been canceled. A number of people's plans have been canceled who actually have been in their homes sometimes for a long time. So that's That's a conundrum. Here's one thing. I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to get this in. Here's one thing you have not heard Gary Dietrich say today, and you know me very well, Mark. I have not jumped into the middle of the fray, the back and forth with political opponents trying to make hay of this in each other's backyard. I'm just not going to engage in that, okay? And the reason I'm not, and I try to talk as objectively as we can about the problems and, people having to come together to solve them, because there is, as you know, Mark, no ultimate value in doing so, right? There's not going to be any value to the people of California just trying to lay blame at somebody's doorstep. Now, again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Is there going to be accountability? Yes. Is some of that appropriate? Absolutely, yes. At the local, state, and federal level, right? And sometimes even in the private sector level. What about the insurance company? What about the fair play? So that's all appropriate, but I am just not going to get sucked down the rabbit hole of screaming and yelling and people online, all the memes and all the rest of it that goes, because there's no value in that. There really, truly is no helpful value in that for the people of California and beyond.
Do you think the federal government will ultimately allow California to build back? And here's where the shoe pinches. It pinches in two places. At minimum, money. So I'm interested in your thought on that. But the second place is a primary directive of an incoming administration that says we want mass roundups of illegals, and people who are not here legally will be deported. Now, when you're talking about the kind of build that is associated with these communities that are devastated, it will absolutely involve people who are here who don't have all the documentation of a legal resident. I'm wondering if that won't be a place in which Donald Trump directs some of these people who will round up illegals. Is that possible? Take that part first and then get to the federal money.
Yeah, well, in terms of the immigration issue, some of this is getting, there's so many things happening at once right now in politics. Sure. It is difficult for people to filter it all out. But in the background of what's happening in, of course, places like SoCal right now, getting a lot of attention, rightfully so, is an administration that is both getting ready to populate itself, as you know, with a lot of nominees and others starting tomorrow. The hearings begin in Washington for cabinet secretaries, but also putting policies in place. So you're starting to hear just in the last few days, what are some of the specifics about the immigration policies that Trump talked about on the campaign trail? And what you're hearing, Mark, and this will be fleshed out even in greater detail in the next few weeks and in the next couple of months, but is that they really are going to start with people who have criminal records that got into the country, that the federal government knows they have either pre-existing criminal records or have committed some kind of fairly significant crime but remain in the country. That's sort of group A. That's where they're going to be starting. The second group that they said they're going to be targeting is people who came in recently and don't have well-established, they don't have a job and a residence or whatever yet. They are sort of, to quote a term, easily deportable because they really don't have any roots or connections here at this juncture. They may not even have family here. So I think you're going to see a tiered approach to this immigration thing. It is not going to be send out every bus in the country to round up 12 million people. For one thing, there's not even federal budget or federal personnel to do that. So I think that's important to point out. And I'm guessing, Mark, that you're going to see a much lower priority on the kind of people you're referencing. Say they're working for a construction company, right? Or they have some other gainful employment. I don't think those people are going to be job A by any stretch of the imagination. And then I think go ahead
to the money. I'll just follow up and then I'll ask you about the money. That's a lot just on what you were saying. A lot of those people and concerns to which you've referred, talking about construction, agriculture, et cetera, these are huge companies and businesses that have been big donors to the Trump campaign. And so I think they have a place at that table when the conversation comes as to who's deported. Now to the federal money. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, in terms of federal dollars, yet to be seen. The FEMA budget's been under the microscope, as you know, a lot, especially in the last 12 months or so, for a whole variety of reasons we don't have time to go into today. But, how the money was spent. Was it targeted to certain areas? politically targeted, right? Or withheld in certain areas? How much of it was spent for non-disaster relief monies? For example, to folks who are undocumented or to housing concerns or other things. So I have no doubt that there is going to be a big discussion immediately in Washington and the Congress about how much is needed to address LA. How does it get there in an objective, nonpartisan way, et cetera. So that's certainly going to be a point of conversation. And almost certainly there's going to be special requests, as there were after Hurricane Helene. There's going to be special requests for additional dollars beyond that currently budgeted, because people are talking about being a $250 billion plus rebuild.
I'm smiling because it's so rich to hear the senator from Wyoming say, well, we're going to we're thinking about giving California the money, but we just want to make sure that all it's used properly. There are definitely going to be some strings attached, is what he said. And it strikes me as both absurd and typical Washington that we can think back not that far to the Trump administration during which Mitch McConnell's wife was the transportation secretary, and she dumped $1 jillion on the state of Kentucky and these no-bid deals that were going to the state of Kentucky. So when Washington wants to have strings attached, it can have strings attached. And when Washington doesn't care about strings attached and they just want to take care of people, it can happen that way too. Gary, and this is kind of a supersized version. You're so beautiful to stay with us for just one more second, because I do want to ask you about the confirmation process. So it does begin. There's been something of a mini scandal with the FBI, and there are Democrats in the Senate that are saying they're missing FBI information on Pete Hegseth. And perhaps other nominees as well, but Hegseth is sort of head of that parade. Can you speak to the background check process and to what extent these gaps and these claims of sort of scandalous gaps might affect confirmation?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say about this, but I'm going to try to condense it into about 90 seconds, okay? So let's use it as an example, Hegseth, just as an example, okay? Up for Secretary of Defense, the FBI personally briefed the now Republican chair of the committee that will review his nomination and the ranking Democratic member last week. Okay, apparently that happened on Friday. A 1-hour briefing by the FBI. So information is getting out. The question is how much and how fast, Mark. And this is not new to the Trump confirmation process, by the way. FBI investigations, depending on who you are, they can be extensive and take quite a long period of time. Now, do you want to take a year to investigate somebody before you have a secretary of fill in the blank? Most people would say, no, that's not reasonable. But do you need more than a week or a couple weeks? Well, maybe you do, at least in some cases. Here's, to me, the interesting political conundrum of this is that to your previous point, Washington can be Washington, right? Just weeks ago, months ago, we had Republicans screaming about the FBI, saying it wasn't objective, it wasn't fair. Now we have a certain number of Democratic senators saying, well, the FBI, of course, under Joe Biden, now we're saying it isn't being fair in producing reports for these Republican nominees. So, it sort of depends on the moment in history and even the day of the week, where you think the FBI is. Is it objective? Is it not? Eventually, some hard questions are going to be asked at these confirmation hearings. And my guess is if some of them are very substantive, you're going to have chairs and vice chairs of these committees saying, well, we got to put the brakes on this until we get more information on ABC.
Well, it's so interesting. The thing that's focused on in the background check with Hegseth, anyway, because we're talking about him, is associated with the various sexual improprieties, about his alcoholism, or what the accusations of alcoholism. Certainly, a lot of drinking going on, and what's lost in all that is basic questions of competence. I mean, he was thrown out of this nonprofit. He's really had an inability to run anything, and now he's going to be in charge of the Pentagon. It seems like a big reach, but there is a death grip that Donald Trump has on this nomination. He likes his Pete Hegseth, and the man does look good. I'll give you that. I mean, if I had his look, God knows, I'd be unstoppable. But apart from that, I mean, I don't see what he's got. Do you this is kind of prediction territory, and now we'll let you go in 60 seconds, I promise. But do you see one of these more controversial nominees, Hegseth, Patel, Gabbard, do you see one of them as more likely not to make it?
Yeah, I wouldn't lay odds on who's more likely than not likely.
Okay.
I think and the reason is because, Mark, we don't have all the information, okay? I don't have all the information. I mean, these FBI investigations, these aren't released publicly, right? These go to the members. So, it's not uncommon in confirmation hearings for some things somewhat surprising to come out. So could that happen? Yes. Could it sink one of these nominations? Yes. I mean, take the other side of the coin. We have some that we know are pretty much going to sail through. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. That's a done deal. These people know him. He's been vetted for years. He's probably going to sail through. So I would say the majority of the nominations are not going to be hugely controversial. Are one or more of the people you mentioned going to be under a microscope and potentially be sunk? Yeah, they could be. Some of this is going to, just be based on sheer data, sheer information. Some of it's going to be political. Is one of these people going to end up being a sacrificial lamb that Democrats feel like we got to take somebody down? That's not uncommon, as you know, and that could well happen.
Yeah, that's so well said. And as we've said before here, presidents generally get most of the cabinet they want, so you can maybe pick off a couple, but you ain't going to be vetoing it all. So especially when you're not in control of things. Listen, you've been great today. Of course, these are extraordinary times, and this is an extraordinarily juicy segment. Thank you. Appreciate you, my friend, and let's hope for better things the rest of this year.
Absolutely.
Gary Dietrich,
Thanks,
everybody.
Mark.
Gary Dietrich segment is sponsored, of course, by Bill Campbell, and thank you, Bill, for giving us a supersized Gary Dietrich segment today. Bill Campbell can be found at Remax Gold, and if you're relocating into or from Northern California, you need a great industry professional, highly respected. Bill Campbell is that guy. He's at Remax Gold. You can call or text him. Bill's at 530-448-7474. 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell at Remax Gold.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.